Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira, and today I'm with the founder of the Silver Bullion Group, Gregor Gregersen. Gregor, welcome back. I wanted to get you into the studio to ask you about the recent trip that you had taken to London LBMA conference, and just wanted to know what things are there that you could share with us, because a lot of times to us, the LBMA can seem like a mysterious entity.
Yes, I think in many ways the LBMA is quite misunderstood, especially by conspiracy theorists. But maybe to start off, there are two types of conferences with the LBMA. There is the annual big LBMA conference. Last year it was in Florida. This year it's going to be in Tokyo. And then there's a biannual conference, LBMA, which is for refiners and assaying. So this is a technical conference where you're primarily going to have the refiners. For example, Valcambi, Metalor, Heraeus, Rand Refinery, also big refineries of the LBMA system, essentially tend to meet up, have presentations on technical matters, how to better produce bars, problems, and so on. So it's sort of a geeky conference for refiners, where also heads of analytical departments of the refiners are coming in and sharing things.
Yeah, and this one was pretty special because you were actually invited or requested to come up, I guess, on the refining side to share the testing component.
Yeah, it was quite a surprise. This year around, there was an interest in non-destructive testing. And we had one of the speakers, which was supposed to talk, was Dr. Ruffoni. Ruffoni is the head, when it comes, is the LBMA referee, and he's the head of, used to be the head of Heraeus refining department. So if you buy a bar from Heraeus or Argo Heraeus, and you get a certificate from it, there's a signature there. It's his signature, basically. He just retired. He now has a successor who was also there at the conference. But he's essentially told us, as he was going to bring a presentation on these matters up, he contacted us and said, look, I saw your video, which actually we co-produced together, the testing video. And he said, I think you guys know a lot about the subject. Why don't you come and present at the conference instead of me? And we were asked to write an abstract of what the presentation will be about. I submitted it to the technical committee of the LBMA. They approved it, and then I ended up going with a colleague to the LBMA conference, and we basically presented how we do our non-destructive testing. And that ended up working out very well at the conference.
Because on every gold bar we buy, we see 9999 pure gold. So as far as the gold, there's actually a standard on purity. But when it comes to testing, is there an industry standard within the LBMA as far as testing?
So one thing to understand, there is, let's say, a bullion bank system out there. And that system relies on this concept of chain of integrity, meaning that if you want to store some gold with JP Morgan or UBS or HSBC or ICBC Standard, which are the four big bullion banks basically, together these banks made London Preciousmetal Clearing Limited entity. And this is sort of, think of it a little bit like an oligopoly, good old boy club in some ways, where of these big banks which together settle almost all of the liquidity happening in London. And we're talking about $45 billion per day, huge amounts. And the question is, how do you make sure the gold is real? And traditionally, the way the system worked is the gold is coming from a refiner. It only stays within a small number of vaults that are approved by this organization. And you have to assume that the gold is okay. And if you're not sure, you send it back to a refiner and you remelt it. So in theory, the vaults don't really need to test because they're saying, I'm assuming the gold is good. But as time passes on, no system is perfect necessarily, and some of these vaults want to start doing testing. Now, one good way of test a bar is by using ultrasound. But the problem with ultrasound sometimes is that, especially when they use these high-end sort of ultrasound devices, you kind of get a picture of the inside of the bar. And what if you see a little dot? If you're a vault operator, how do you interpret that? Is that okay or is that not okay? Well, you might just say, well, my job is to test it. Anything I see which I don't like, which is out of the ordinary, I refuse the bar, right? But maybe the bar is okay. And now you've got good bars sort of being refused. And now the refiners are saying, hey, that's not right? These bars are okay. How can you start refusing all of this? You're messing things up. And so there's been a little bit of issue going on between the refiners, which are saying we are producing the bars to spec. It's got the purity, it's got the mass. You're just saying that inside there might be a tiny bit of porosity, which is causing this issue, and you're refusing my bars when you shouldn't be. What is porosity? Well, porosity is can be a production issue. When you make a bar, it is possible for a bar to have little tiny air bubbles inside. Now, if there's a lot of porosity, then your ultrasound is not going to give you a good return. And if that's the only way you test it, you probably don't want to accept the bar. Now, the reason why it's not a problem in terms of the bar itself is when you produce a bar, that bar always is a little bit bigger than originally meant. So, for example, if you're making a 1 kilo bar, it's actually producing the bar to be 1 kilo and 1 gram or something like this. And then it goes into acid baths usually, and it slowly gets reduced in gold quantity until it matches exactly 1 kilo. And as you go through this process, essentially you can fine tune things. If you have a little air bubble inside, it just means the bar is bigger. And when I mean air bubble, I mean a tiny little air bubble, I'm not meaning a big one. So is that cause for the vault to refuse the bar or no? And that's sort of where in the LBMA systems have been having this back and forth. And so that's where an interest came in about non-destructive testing and how do you set the standard. And so what was interesting to the people at the conference was the fact that we test multiple physical characteristics. And that's something new, which usually people, for whatever reason, haven't really thought about doing it this way. So in the past, there was people who would represent, a lot of technical details about X-ray spectrography. And what they would do usually, if you're in an analytical lab, they would usually start scraping off parts of the bar, kind of drill down and do X-ray spectrography inside the bar. But that's destructive, right? The bar isn't good delivery after that anymore. Ultrasound is a good way of testing bar, but you do have this issue of porosity we just mentioned, which might come up sometimes. So what we were presenting, which they were not as familiar with, is using magnetism, because gold repulses magnets, whereas tungsten, which is what you would use to fake gold bars most of the time, because the density is almost the same, attracts magnets. So if you take a rare earth magnet and it sticks to the bar, you got a problem, because it's supposed to be falling off really quickly. And we have a device that we developed where basically you put a magnet on a little scale. You have a fixed distance to the sample that you're putting on top, and then you tear it, and you basically then measure how much attraction or repulsion you're getting from that bar. And it works quite well. If you take like a little piece of jewelry or something, like a chain, and you pass it over, you will see it being repulsed, and then when you get to the point where you've got the connector, which has a little bit of iron in it, suddenly you'll see it spike up. So Magnetism, you have to interpret it a little bit, but it's a good way of looking if there's tungsten inside. So that was something new. Electrical conductivity. That one is actually more popular. There's the Sigma detectors, which have been working very well. But that's not something used in the LBMA at large, so they weren't that familiar with it. I guess one problem with electrical conductivity is it will penetrate about 5 millimeters into the bar, which means if you take a 1 kilo bar, which is about 10 millimeters, works nice because you can check both sides. But if you take those big LBMA bars, which are like 12 kilos, 400 ounce, you can't always look all the way in. So each testing system basically has advantages and disadvantages. But what we were sort of trying to show, or were able to show to them, is if you have 5 different tests that you can do, which are all practical, as long as you get 3 of these tests, to sort of agree, it's basically almost impossible for there to be a fake bar. And so if you have some issues with because of porosity with the ultrasound testing, well, if these other things are okay, then maybe you ought to consider, that you don't have to refuse a bar, or have some sort of standard where, it can become acceptable. And so I think that's something the refiners kind of like to hear, because I think the biggest problem the refiners are having is the lack of standardization, where some guy in some vault might just say, well, I don't like what I'm seeing, I'm sending it back. And the refiner saying, well, it's a good bar, right? And so, and that's something we realized, that that's sort of, with the vault starting to do some of this testing, there's sort of a demand for more standardization in the industry right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that standardization because, I mean, is it something where, because the gold price has been going up, is it something because banks are holding gold more in reserves now? Gold is getting a bit more popular amongst investors. So I was curious why the standard? Why is that becoming more important?
Good question. I think, yeah, the value of gold keeps on going up, and I'm assuming that people realized it does make sense for us to test, because we have a big pillar down, Experience Center, which says trust but verify. So regardless where the gold comes in, it's not a bad idea. I mean, one of these bars now, 1 kilo bar, is almost $100,000. You take these big 400 ounce bars, and we're talking about 1.2 million. I mean, why wouldn't you want to spend a few minutes in a way of double checking that everything is okay? So I think it's just a natural thing, for these vaults to start doing it. Because these vaults are inside this closed system, in the past they haven't been testing as much. And keep in mind, most vaults are not in the business of testing. By default, vaults are storing on a set to contain basis. And if you're storing with commercial vaults, we'll be signing a contract which says you're storing on a set to contain. Set to contain means if whoever it is who's getting the bullion is saying it's real gold, I'm storing it as real gold and insuring it as real gold. If it later turns out not to be real gold, don't ask me, it's not my problem as a vault. You check with whoever you bought it with. That's what set to contain means. And we kind of changed the rules a little bit, because whatever gold we are coming in, or Star Storage Program or Star Grams, we will test it. And hence we had to develop these systems. And so it's quite an honor in a way, to kind of be called up by essentially the top analytical labs in the industry from these big refiners, and be able to present to them, and them sort of being interested in it, because we didn't know when we went there. Maybe they were just kind of spit at us and say, "Oh, you guys don't have the PhD in so and so," but it was very productive.
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as I've been here, Silver Bullion has had the D.U.X testing system, so I think it was always ahead of the curve. So much so that while you were there, you had a pretty interesting story where the actual machines that go ahead and melt down the gold into bars and package it up, these I guess huge type of refining machines, they heard your story, and they were interested in how they could probably or hopefully incorporate testing when the bar is actually being made and packaged?
Because of the issue we just discussed about the porosity and so on, of course, the companies which manufacture the machinery which the vaults and buy, they have an interest on making sure that the bars are good delivery, because obviously the refiners wanting to produce bars which are going to be according to spec. And if the vaults have an issue, it becomes a problem for the manufacturers of this equipment. And this conference was sponsored, primarily by these manufacturers, because their clients are the big refiners which are going to buy these machines. And so the interesting thing is there are two companies which sort of are at the forefront of this, which kind of tend to dominate the industry, and they tend to be Italian. And this Ecoy and Terra Automation are sort of the two main ones. And these guys have, you can see it, they have a lot of passion. I always say, these are the Italians which prevent Italy from collapsing. Because it's not easy to have a company in Italy and running it. But you definitely have a lot of passion. These machines are highly advanced. There are 4 different types of robots able to move the things around. They keep on reducing the size of the machine, reduce the electrical consumption. An interesting thing I didn't know, when you make these bars, apparently they were using more electricity to cool things down rather than heating it up to melt the grains. So anyway, a lot of interesting sort of things that came out of it. But Luca, which was the founder of one of these companies, was at the conference, one of the sponsors, one of the presenters as well for his latest machines. And he just kind of came up and said, hey, I think this is a great idea. How about we work together? And we build an automated machine where you put in a bar. It goes through 4 or 5 different tests. And then based on these tests, we can kind of automatically say, yeah, this bar is good, or we have an issue with this bar, or, should be good, but maybe have a second look, kind of system. So that was an interesting, really good idea, because they know how to build these things. And if they're willing to put in the money and the investments and so on, and Luca was sort of putting it to me, yeah, look, we built this thing, we'll use some of your standards and so on, and we'll send you the machine to the vault in Singapore. And that's like the gym, meaning you test the machine out, you find all the bugs, we find the improvements, we kind of make the modifications, we go over this a few times, and by the time the next conference comes, maybe we can present a new machine in 2 years' time, which can do it and test it automatically. And so they're telling me that they have their own X-ray spectrography code and things, so they can basically put all these things together. And so when I came back to Singapore, we are discussing it as well, and we are in the process of getting ISO 17025 certification on the process, which is actually a highly respected standard, I found out, because all the analytical labs of Rand Refinery, Valcambi, Heraeus, Metalor, so all use the 17025 standard. So if we get that standard, they tend to trust the standard. And so if you can use a standard and automate it with this machine, then it can be quite powerful. And so since we're in London anyway, we ended up visiting Lloyd's of London, which is an amazing building, by the way. I just love Lloyd's of London. And how it managed to last so long, as well, almost 400 years now. But we spoke with some of the specialized brokers, and they said that if this is ISO 17025 and it's standardized, it might be possible to get a Lloyd's of London insurance on the results of the machine. So if we can make the machine, we can get it insured by Lloyd's of London, then we can probably put it in some of these vaults. If we put in some of these vaults, then probably say refiners might also want it, so that they can use a machine as a test to see whether the standard is acceptable. And if everybody uses that standard, then we don't need to have rejects anymore. So that's a little bit one of the ideas that came out of the trip in London. And now we have to see if we can make it work. But there's a lot of excitement here by the stuff. We're going to have one of the people working at GE come back over to us, a materials engineer, to see if we can get this standard finished. And we might be working with the British Institute of Standards on it to see if we can get it going, maybe by next year or so.
I've heard bits and pieces of the trip, and I mean everything from Silver Bullion's standards to testing, even all the way down to the pallet cages in the vaults. What was the interest with the pallet cages?
As I mentioned, there is that sort of closed system where these big banks, bullion banks, sort of store. And right now, they're essentially storing in the Bank of England. Each one of these big entities has their own vault. So HSBC has a vault, which, by the way, where a lot of the GLD gold is stored, New York and other places. You have UBS, which is storing quite a bit of stuff in Switzerland. HSBC, or you mentioned JP Morgan, of course. It's a famous/infamous bank. And then we've got ICBC Standard, which is other entity. So these guys are inside the group. Bank of England inside the group, and then we have Loomis, Malka Ahmed, and Prinks. And these are all entities that have vaults in London, and they're accredited LBMA refiners. And that sort of puts them inside this grouping. So we are not in the group because we don't have a vault in London. I don't want to have a vault in London. I only want to be in Singapore because of jurisdictional reasons. And of course, because we think we're going to have a big crisis and we just only want to listen to Singapore law and nowhere else. But yet, it will be nice for us to be able to also be inside this sort of grouping, so that when larger clients come, we can have larger liquidity. Because the reality is, when you want to buy 100 tons of silver, there are not that many entities which can provide it if you're buying 4 tons of gold. Right? You want to buy $300 million worth of gold, who's going to sell it to you? The retailers cannot. The distributors of the retailers also cannot. You kind of need to go to a level where you end up having to interact either with the refinery in some ways or with the bullion banks. And with gold, you can go with the refinery. With silver, there aren't that many silver refineries. So ultimately, you have to go through some of these entities. And that's how you can get the best prices. So important for us to sort of be able to build the confidence that we can participate a little bit in the system as well. And one of the ways, I think, is you have to build trust that if somebody is storing with you, us being a new company, we've been around for, 16 years now, which compared to Prinks, which has been around for like 120 years, it's new. You have to do as many things as you can. And that's why we have very good insurance. But what else can we do? Well, we have the testing, which is now being recognized more and more as being reliable. But one of the things I think which have come across very well are the pallet cages, which you meant. And if you look into main vault, and we are sitting next to it right now, we have up to 10,000 ton storage capacity. And that's being done by having these Euro-sized pallets, which can hold about 14 LBMA class delivery bars, so 14,000 ounces of silver. And we essentially had the idea, well, let's put a cage on top. They're made of metal already, and essentially they become a metal cage where we have a tamper evidence seal on top of it, numbered. And instead of having to deal with a 1,000 ounce bar as your entity of audit, you now have just deal with 450 kilo or 14,000 ounce pallet. And it if you store large amounts of silver, I mean, we're having some clients which are about to buy 80 tons of silver, then you essentially need to make things simpler because you'll just buy it by pallet. And I think that pallet looks very nice, and it just kind of makes people go, oh yeah, I can see how this is a good way of storing. And it's been helping, I guess, to build confidence and for us to be able to create some of these relationships, which I think are needed to really be able to fill up the type of capacities that we created.
You brought up a great point about liquidity. Things like the standards, the testing, the pallet cages, the insurance. It seems like there will only be more and more liquidity coming to the gold investor. Would that be true?
If 1 ounce of gold is worth $1,000, and now it's worth $3,000, it takes 3 times more money, in a way, to buy the gold. So if the gold didn't change in quantity, you now have to pay, you have 3 times more liquidity. Basically, $1 million buys you 1/3 of what it used to be, right? So in that sense, yes, and of course there's more gold being mined as well. And I think because of geopolitics and the amount of depth that we are creating, I think more and more people are starting to realize how important it is to have physical gold stored as your own property outside the financial system in a safe jurisdiction, fully tested and insured. Right. So these are essentially the value propositions. That's why we started Silver Bullion in the first place. And I think more and more people are really realizing that. It's just that now that we built this facility, the type of clients we're getting are just becoming larger and larger. And there's just this reality that you have to be able to find, if somebody asks you to buy 1 million ounces of silver, it's not as easy as it used to be, where you just call a distributor up and you say, I need 10,000 ounces. Okay, but 1 million, that's something else. So now we are kind of working on getting this scale kind of quantities to work efficiently.
Yeah, I think that's something that once the building was finished, the reserve, things have really opened up for you, or a lot more opportunities have come your way.
The reserve creates automatic trust because people are seeing how much investment, how much work, how much passion went into it. And it's fully owned by us. There's no other entity in here. I think the important thing is it gets people interested. Once people are interested, if they start digging a bit deeper, then people sort of start to really realize that, yes, it is truly a solution which was built, to withstand a crisis. And as we have more and more people doing that now, the demand for our services are really starting to explode.
Yeah, you can see it on the faces of people when they stop by, that they're just like absolutely amazed at the size of the building, the vault, and those stacks of silver piled high.
Most people are surprised how big it is in reality because they see a picture of it, and it's not always clear by scale how big it really is. But yeah, I think the most common comment I had now is like, when they go into the silver vault, it feels like a cathedral, with the logo being up there and 32-meter high, like 100-foot high ceilings, and silver stacked 40 feet high. So it's something else.
Yeah, it's I'm amazed. I fortunately get to take a look at it every day. I got to ask you one thing though. In London, what was the word on the street, or the talk, I guess, of the gold movement out of the vaults? And I mean, what were people saying about that?
There is sort of this world, right? So we got the gold bug community, and we are kind of our gold bug community. I mean, that's kind of how everything started, right? But then we are also get this institutional LBMA sort of world, some of the big banks, and so we have a foot on both sides. right? So we're sort of in the middle, and I think we have to realize that nowadays with social media, there is this big incentive for companies to make headlines. Click on my video, and if I come up with a really spiffy headline, the world is about to collapse, then more people are going to click on my video, and that's causing, otherwise decent companies to come up with complete nonsense headlines. And they should know better, but they want the clicks. And so you see a lot of opportunism happening where, there were companies saying, oh, LBMA, says the Bank of England is about to collapse. It's about to go bankrupt and so on. And you have to understand, in the LBMA vaults in London, there are about 8,500 tons of gold. That's more than the US is supposed to own in Fort Knox. And of course, now we had the gold going to the United States. But if you look at the numbers from the LBMA, I mean, we only had a few percentage points going down. And yes, it takes 6 weeks to get out, but think about it. To get gold out, if you want to move, let's say, 600 tons of gold, if you get a really big truck, maybe you can put 2 tons into the truck. And remember, 2 tons, I mean, that is a huge amount of money already. So you got insurance, you get other things like this, and you now need 400 trucks. How many trucks can you do in one day, right? So just because it takes longer to get the gold out doesn't mean that the Bank of England is bankrupt. And so that's a very naive message that's being sent out there. And of course, at the LBMA, I was speaking with some of the people there, and what do you think about people saying the Bank of England is bankrupt? And I mean, their response was, well, we just send out our statistics and we move on as usual. We don't really bother too much with it, because if they were to engage with it, what's they going to say? Now it's not going to go bankrupt? Is that going to change anything? No. So I can kind of see their point. I think there's a general feeling that things are going to change a bit. And I think there's an understanding slowly that London probably is not going to remain the big center. Because for the viewers which are not familiar with how things sort of operate, almost all the physical gold is traded in London. And in the United States, you have a lot of paper gold. COMEX and so on, right? They don't have a lot of physical backups. And so every 3 months or so, when the future contracts expire, there's gold flowing from London over to the United States, because the different banks that are shorting gold are going to have to take delivery of some of this gold. And so they need to make sure the gold comes in. So when Trump came along and said, oh, we are putting tariffs on Canada, we're putting tariffs on Mexico, well, people got very worried. What if Trump is going to put a tariff on London? And what if it includes gold? Because if you are a US bank and you have to deliver, I don't know, let's say 100,000 ounces of gold, and you need to get that gold out of London, and suddenly there's a 20% tax on it? I mean, think about $3,000, 20% is $600. What if the bank has to pay $600 import tariff to deliver on the contracts that they're contractually obligated to deliver? And that really scared them. And that's why, so many banks started saying, send the gold over London. And then London, of course, they couldn't get the gold out as fast. And so what essentially happened is the price of gold in the London Bank of England, where losses was coming out of, and some other vaults, ended up going below spot a little bit. The premium, it was, I think at the height, it was $4 below spot. And what that just means is that if you exchange your gold in the US, which is where the demand is, and let's say it's selling at $10 over spot, and you want it to come from London, then somebody is willing to exchange positions saying that I get you gold in London in exchange for gold here, and 10 plus 4, you earn $14. You know what I mean? And so that's basically when we had people chartering planes or something, putting gold into the plane, because while there was this discrepancy, if you can make $14 on an ounce of gold and you do it in large quantity, you can make a good earning. And that's how all this gold kind of flowed over. But saying that because of that, the whole system is collapsing, that's just hyperbole, basically. Most of that movement now is sort of abated. It's not as much anymore. And there's actually, from a percentage point of view, there's quite a bit more silver moving to the US compared to gold. And now there's silver moving from Asia to London to partially make up for that. Another thing to understand, which complicates everything more, is a lot of the gold didn't actually go from London to New York. It went from London to Switzerland because COMEX would not accept LBMA good delivery gold 400-ounce bars. So would only accept 100-ounce gold bars, which nobody has or makes, or 1 kilo gold bars, which a lot of people do. But they wouldn't accept the 400-ounce gold bars. So these banks basically had to get the gold out of the Bank of London, send it to Switzerland, have it refined as quickly as possible. And so these refiners had to work overtime, make 1 kilo bars, and then ship the 1 kilo bars to the US as quickly as possible before Trump were to put tariffs in there. And that's essentially, what happened. So don't get me wrong. I do expect the whole financial system to fail at some point, which is why we build all of this. But it's not happening, in January or February 2025. I think it's important not to jump the gun every time, there's a little blip or for somebody to kind of come out and create the hyperbole just to be ranked highly on some X algorithm or something like that.
You had some great insight. A lot of us, we never get this news. We're consumed with different types of news, and sometimes the really relevant things get a bit lost in the shuffle. But having said that, what's going on in the West, what's going on in the East, in Asia, your insights with LBMA and the top gold organizations. How do you see Silver Bullion positioning itself as far as investors looking for a safe place for their investment, or accommodating the views that they have in various parts of the world?
I think when 2008 happened, and the financial crisis happened, that's when I realized we have to have a safe haven outside of the financial system. And essentially, that's what we wanted to build with Silver Bullion. And it's called Silver Bullion because I have a particular affinity for silver more than gold, and wanted to focus on that. I call it the forgotten metal, because in the US it's a little bit different. In the US, people sort of see silver, as being an important precious metal and so on. But if you go to the rest of the world, a lot of countries have a VAT tax on silver, and so it isn't really seen much of an investment, physical at least, because you have to pay the tax. So anyway, we want to be the safest place for your gold and silver anywhere in the world. And we chose Singapore because it's a very wealthy jurisdiction. It's very well run. All of its wealth came from foreign investors essentially investing in Singapore, which means if they ever were to betray their trust, it's economic suicide. They have no reason to do it. They're very well defended, and they're politically neutral. And they're friends of the United States, they're friends of China, and of all the countries I visited, this is the best place. So essentially our message is buy some physical gold and silver, put it in a safe place, And our job is to make sure to keep it as safe as possible and protect the client from ourselves by building systems in place transparently, which make it so that we cannot take it from the client and protect it from other things that might happen, including nationalizations in the US, which is, I think, one of the biggest threats we might be facing in the future, because the jurisdiction of the United States is very, very large. And just because you're storing metals in offshore doesn't mean that the vault operator who's storing that metal for you doesn't have to follow US law. That's something people often forget. And so these are also things that we sort of addressed and sort of provided a service for. And that's how the clients which are really digging deeper, so you usually end up finding us. And I love having discussions about these things with clients and figuring out how we can make things better. Or going to these conferences with the LBMA and mixing with the analytical analysis departments on how to test gold better, and just builds a better mousetrap, essentially. Because at some point, we're going to have a terrible systemic crisis.
World Gold Council, LBMA, the top tier organizations in the industry, they are noticing silver bullion more and more with what you're doing. You see a growing role with them?
Oh, yes. I mean, we had a private event with the World Gold Council a month ago or so. We are having a press event with the World Council here at the Reserve with reporters from the major international media coming as well, where we can talk about gold. And we like the World Gold Council very much because they're a non-profit association which essentially provides statistics and reasons why buy gold. And we have a collaboration on how to improve best practices for dealers. How do you prevent entities for storing gold from misrepresenting what's being stored? Because many times people think they own gold when there's really no gold behind it. And it's fully legal, it's just you didn't read the small print. And so I think the World Gold Council, they did a big survey with 180,000 people or so. And they found out that one of the biggest worries of people buying gold is it real? Can I trust the dealer? And it's really ultimately about trust. And our business has always been built up about establishing trust through transparency. And that basically gets us very much aligned, in principle with what the World Gold Council is doing. And that's where, we can work together, I think, very well. We're quite lucky to have this relationship with the World Gold Council.
I think it's well earned. I mean, I've been fortunate to be here for a while, and as I've said, I've seen it happen. I've seen it unfold. So, with that, I want to thank you for stopping by and sharing these insights. I think it was really great info. Jim Rogers was here a few weeks back. He likes silver. He went down and bought some silver. Can I interest you in going down and buying some silver as well?
My money is already all in silver. I've got no money left to buy more. But yeah. I mean, if I were to buy something right now, the latest thing I bought are Britannia coins, silver. And for those people who don't know, Britannia coins are special because they're coming from the Royal Mint, which is by far the oldest mint, 1,100 years. They were the guys, I think, ahead of everybody else making them. And they started off in the Tower of London, which is one of the places we visited in London. And one of the heads of the Royal Mint was Isaac Newton.
No kidding.
The guy who did Principia Mathematica and discovered how gravity works, essentially. There's so much history going back there, but that's not why you should buy Britannia coins. The reason why you should buy Britannia coins is because for British residents, there's no capital gain tax.
Oh.
So most countries in the world, when you buy gold at $2,000 and goes up to $4,000, you're supposed to pay taxes on your gain, right? So if you buy the Britannia coin from the Royal Mint and you're a British tax resident, you don't have to pay capital gain tax. So if you're not a British resident, why should you care? Well, if the Britannia coin costs the same as some other coin, which one would you buy? I think you should buy the Britannia coin because you can sell it to the British residents at a premium. So even though it might not help you, it's definitely an arbitrage sort of benefit. And I think right now Britannia coins are really kind of undervalued by the market. And what's happening in right now, and we did meet with the Royal Mint, so I had discussion with this from last week, is essentially in London or in England, everybody's buying Royal Mint coins now. Because why would you buy something you have to pay taxes on when you can buy something you don't have to? But that's for gold.
Yes.
For silver, if you're buying coins in England, you have to pay a sales tax. So people really don't buy silver so much, buy the coin. So the Royal Mint has it's kind of like a shortage of gold coins in manufacturing capacity, but they have plenty of silver. And so we are looking to try to get as much of these silver coins as we can, especially for British clients. You know, it's a no-brainer. But for other clients as well, you know, that would be the best thing to buy. And that's what I've been buying myself. Also because I think it's important to note, when you buy a coin, you're paying a premium. So let's say you're buying the cheapest form of silver, let's say it's the LBMA bar, and you're going to pay, let's say, 50 cents over spot for that bar. If you buy a coin, you might be paying $2. So why pay so much more? Well, if you go back to COVID, the premium of coins went through the roof, especially in the US. American Eagle, you had to pay $8 or $10 above spot. Similar story with a Maple Leaf or other coins. Britannia will be the same way. So I see this $2 premium not so much as a cost. I see it as an investment in itself. And so what I like to do when you're in a non-crisis environment, pay a little bit more, buy the coins, and then you wait until the crisis comes. Everybody wanting the coins because they expect to be able to buy the piece of bread with the coins. They don't want one big bar. But you know, unless we really go down the drain, at that point, I like to switch back from the silver coins back into the LBMA bar, because I can sell it at that $8 premium, and I can get a lot more silver. And once the crisis is over, the thing goes back to $2, and I can sell my silver bar and get back into the silver coins.
And I think you did the opposite a few years back, where the American Eagle coin, where you sold that to get
I
bars.
used to have quite a lot of American Eagles. When COVID happened, I said, holy crap, why are people paying $10 over spot for Eagles? Of course I want to keep my silver, but I'm happy to have silver bars, sell my Eagles, get the silver bars, and I managed to get, you know, those. Because back then, silver had crashed down to $12 for a little while. Indeed. And you had a premium of $8, which meant I got 50% more silver. And then I just had to wait. Now silver's back to $34. It was a no-brainer, basically. So if people have to decide what to buy, my advice is buy silver Britannia coins. Buy silver because the gold-silver ratio is almost 90 now, meaning silver is very cheap historically. And then buy the coin, because the coin, we are not in a crisis, coins are not so expensive. And between the coin, buy the Britannia coin, because you have this tax-free advantage on top of that.
All right, Gregor Gregersen, again, want to thank you for your insights, and I hope to get you back in here soon and share more of the things that you're in the know with. So again, I thank you for your time.
Yeah, anytime.
That was Silver Bullion founder Gregor Gregersen sharing his views on the economy and the LBMA. To follow more of Gregor's views, visit his Insights tab at www.silverbullion.com.sg. If you like this video, please do subscribe, share, and give it a thumbs up. All are greatly appreciated. Audio-only versions of this interview can be found on iTunes and Spotify.